that are coming actually will be and what operators can expect. Certainly know that probably many of our operators, some of our operators are able to make those meetings, but we thought that, certainly nothing wrong with getting another chance to hear about the changes, and for those members and operators who weren't able to make those meetings but could make the annual meeting, we wanted to have a chance to speak about the forthcoming regulatory package. And so with that, Kim, you ready? All right.
Thank you. Good morning. Marvin and I are going to tag team this. This presentation is a little bit of a condensed version of what we gave at those 3 operator outreach meetings. So we're going to talk about the Oil and Gas Modernization Act, also known as Senate Bill 186. It was effective June 24th. This was a collaborative effort that came out of the Oil and Gas Work Group, which I'll talk about a little bit here. The Oil and Gas Work Group was created by the Energy and Environment Cabinet Secretary, Dr. Lynn Peters, in May of 2014. We were tasked with reviewing the current regulations and statutes, suggesting appropriate revisions or creations of new ones, come out with regulations to go with those, and then suggest possible legislation for the 2015 General Assembly session. Like I said, this work group was a collaborative effort. We had cabinet members from Department of Natural Resources, Division of Oil and Gas, Division of Water, COGA was highly involved. We had a representative from the Environmental Quality Commission, Kentucky Resource Council, Farm Bureau, independent attorneys, general public. So the bill was initially introduced into the House by Representative Rocky Atkins and was given Senate Bill 386. It was picked up by Senator Julian Carroll and introduced into the Senate as 186. That is the one that ended up going through unanimous support, both chambers, signed into law in March, and like we said, was effective on June 24th. Now, I know most of you are not jumping for joy over these new rules, but I think you'll get the hang of them pretty quickly. So the first big change was the well definition. For as long as I've known, shallow well has been 4,000 feet or less. It is now 6,000 feet. So you can drill down to 6,000 feet on shallow well spacing. Deep well is now anything below 6,000 feet. So that's a pretty significant change. We did have a change to our permitting fee structure. Shallow well permitting is still the same, still $350. For vertical wells, we have 500 and 600 based on the depth. For horizontal wells, based on total measured depth, it is 5,000 and 6,000. If you have multilaterals, we'll tack an extra $500 on each lateral. And if you have additional horizontal wells on the same well pad, we get a little bit of a discount on that. The work group felt this was appropriate. These horizontal, deep wells, multilateral wells do require a more extensive review. We did have some changes to our bonding structure. Bonding for shallow wells is still the same. We did have to go in and add the 5,000 to 6,000 foot tiers because they were not in the 590 statute. So we added those. We have individual bonds for vertical deep wells and horizontal deep wells. And we created blanket bonds for vertical deep wells and horizontal deep wells. I know this is a lot to take in. This presentation is on our website, so if you want to look at it later, but just be aware that there are changes. One of the biggest changes for the bonding is that for shallow wells, the bonding covers the plugging of the well. For the deep wells, the bonding is now going to cover plugging and reclamation of the well site. All right, another big change. We're falling in line with many other oil and gas producing states. We're going to require public disclosure of fluids and additives. A high volume hydraulic fracturing is now defined in Kentucky as using more than 320,000 gallons or 80,000 gallons per stage. So if you have, and this is just for horizontal wells, so if you use more, if you meet these thresholds, then you'll have to report your fluids to the chemical disclosure website, Frac Focus. I think most of you are familiar with fracfocus.org. It's a chemical disclosure website run by the Groundwater Protection Council, and most oil and gas producing states have this requirement now to file with them. So it will require oil field vendors and well service contractors to provide the operators with the information to upload it into fracfocus.org. Allows operators to claim a limited trade secret status, and there is a method for disputes regarding the trade secret status or disclosures set out for medical emergencies if a doctor or hospital would have to call. That is all in the new statutes. One thing I didn't add a slide for and probably should have, operators are now required to provide notice of a horizontal high volume hydraulic fracturing treatment. A notice would go to each surface owner within 1,000 feet of the surface location at least 20 days prior to the treatment. We do have a groundwater testing requirement now. Baseline water testing is required 20 days prior to performing a deep horizontal high volume fracturing stimulation treatment. And then you'll have to go back to the same site within 3 to 6 months after the treatment and do the test again. They have to be conducted by a certified laboratory and filled in on this ED40 form, which is a new form. This form is part of that regulation package that Andrew just spoke about. That will be effective early August. Another thing that came out of the work group and this legislation was to address the abandoned storage tank problem. I'm sure all of you realize there are plenty of abandoned storage tank funds or storage tanks sitting around out there. So we created the Kentucky Abandoned Storage Tank Reclamation Fund to clean up these abandoned storage facilities. This will run similar to our abandoned well plugging program, where we identify the sites, we put out bids, and we pay for the cleanup out of this fund. The division did a cursory review of the abandoned tank problem, found about 4,400 sites. Now there's probably more than one tank per site, so this can lead to contamination of the topsoil, surface waters, freshwater aquifers, reduced property values. We know it's a pain for the farmers, so we're hoping to address this situation with this. However, there is no money in this fund yet. So what we've done is we've set everything up so when a funding source is identified, we'll be able to go forward with that. The oil and gas work group is still meeting. We started up meetings about a month or so ago, and this is one of the priorities, is to find some funding for this program. So the statutes define what an abandoned storage tank is, or a facility. What we consider abandoned. If we find one, we'll notify the operator. He's got 30 days to respond back to us. We establish criteria, prioritizing, which one, worst case to not as bad. And then if soil contamination is encountered at least 3 or more than 3 feet in depth, we're going to refer that over to the Department for Environmental Protection to take care of that, because we realize one nasty site may completely deplete the fund. So we did have some legislation in there for us to do cost recovery. We do have legislation in there that gives the cabinet the right to enter the property to assess the situation. We does allow for if a person wants to remove the tank himself, he can do that, but it's at his own risk. We're not going to reimburse. And like I said, there's not a funding source yet, but that's in the works. Now, next, this is what is going to affect most people, is well site reclamation plans. A well site reclamation plan is now going to be due on every oil and gas site. It was on severed minerals only, now it's on every site. So I'm going to let Marvin take over and discuss this aspect of it.
Okay. Thank you. If I could, I'd just like to, if I could go back. Oh, sorry.
How you go back?
Okay. Well, how do I get back to where the reclamation is? Brandon, how do we get back to the beginning?
There you go.
There we go. I'd just like to touch a little bit more on the abandoned tank issue. The process that we used to come up with the 4,400 abandoned sites, we took information from the Division of Water database when they identified and required well operators to register the storage tank facilities. We took that as a baseline, which was required up through 2008. After that, we took wells that have been permitted for both oil and gas. We had to make some assumptions, and also assumptions on success ratios of those new permits. And we come up with an actual tank battery inventory of approximately 17,000 tanks in the state that we know that we've got. And like Kim said, there's going to be a lot more than that. And she also mentioned the fact that we're going to use the same procedure we have on orphan wells to address these tanks. We've already implemented an inspection module in our RBDMS electronic database to inspect these facilities and have everything in order once we do establish funding for the program. Well, there we go. Now, as far as well site reclamation, like Kim said, under Senate Bill 186, it does require a reclamation plan. And as she also stated, currently, any well that's permitted on a severed mineral estate, and as you know, a severed mineral estate is any surface tract that's been separated or severed from the mineral interest on an individual tract. Under that requirement, the well operator must file an ED-10, and that form is known as a plan to prevent erosion of and sedimentation from a well site. And those of you that have operated in the 2 geologic basins probably have had wells permitted on severed mineral tracts, and you're familiar with the various phases required, identification of surface disturbance, attaching a map to the ED-10 showing the proposed route of the well access road. So you're familiar with these issues. The problem that we had during the outreach meetings were the fact that the well operators in the south central part of the state, they had never completed or prepared an ED-10. So we had to basically walk them through the process. And we've got a slide farther in the presentation that'll give you some ideas, some of the issues we've had so far since the implementation of Senate Bill 186. But these are just some of the requirements that are currently required under KRS 3535901 on severed mineral tracts, and these are just going to piggyback or follow with Senate Bill 186, but it's going to be enhanced to include best management practices on all disturbed areas. You have to describe areas to be disturbed. That includes the well access road, well pads, gathering lines, and any associated storage tanks. If these are off-site, those also need to be described in the narrative section of ED 10 and also identified on the attached map. To identify steps to prevent erosion and sedimentation from all disturbed areas, including access roads and well sites. And as we talk about BMPs or best management practices, you're going to have to identify these specific BMPs you're going to implement to prevent erosion from the disturbed area, sedimentation from that disturbed area, and how you're going to divert and control surface water runoff. You also, as you do now, have to include a proposed vegetative mixture for the disturbed area, and that's all part of the reclamation program. Like I said, Senate Bill 186, in conjunction with the current reclamation regulation 805 KER 1170, it requires best management practices, but once that regulation, the revision of 805 1170 becomes effective, the old ED 10 will now be known as an operations and reclamation plan. And this form is on our website, and this is more involved than the old ED 10 because it's going to require the operator to identify those best management practices that are going to be implemented. And we have the definition of a BMP up there. It's demonstrated practices or procedures intended to control site runoff and pollution of surface waters and groundwaters to prevent the pollution of waters of the Commonwealth. And the map that's attached to the new operations and reclamation plan that will be required at the end of August as a result of that regulation being promulgated again. All of that information is going to have to be included on there, and those BMPs are going to have to be identified. And we've got some of the areas of concern that are going to have to be identified with the new operations and reclamation plan. A lot of these are just enhancements of what you already do if you do have wells on severed mineral tracts. Construction methods to be utilized on the access road and well site to control runoff, erosion control measures, what type of BMPs are you going to implement to control any kind of discharge from those disturbed areas, reclamation methods to be used after well completion. The thing you need to realize is this reclamation plan is going to be in effect for the productive life of that well. And that's because we're going to have maintenance, continued maintenance of all disturbed areas through the productive life of that well. Anytime we have any kind of excessive erosion or discharge from a disturbed area, under these new requirements, you're going to have to address those. And then, like I said, the reclamation plan is in effect all the way through site closure. That includes plugging, abandonment, and final reclamation of the well site. In addition to what we currently require under both KRS 353-5901 and 805 KR 1170, you're also going to have to identify additional features such as utilities near the access road with those distance parameters highlighted, water features, and drainage patterns. And obviously, the drainage patterns can be identified on the map attached to the operations and reclamation plan. And with that, with the topographic contours, it'll be pretty self-evident as to where the drainage patterns are on the surface. This is an existing ED10. Like I said, it's a plan to prevent erosion of and sedimentation from a well site. And because the regulation that requires the use of the operations and reclamation plan will not be in effect until the end of August, we're currently requiring any operator that permits a well on or after June the 24th to provide us with the existing ED10, identifying how they're going to reclaim the disturbed areas, any kind of erosion, sedimentation control measures they're going to implement, and also the vegetative mixtures which are included on the bottom. And we're going to continue to use this form to meet the requirements of Senate Bill 186 until the end of August, when we'll switch over to the operations and reclamation plan. This is a typical map that we currently have or currently require under 353-5901 and 805-1170. Here we have a proposed well access road identified in red, and this is for a proposed well in eastern Kentucky. It's a multi-well horizontal well pad, and these are some of the things that we want to see, especially as we transition into requiring the operations and reclamation plan. And just like we have in the old map requirements, we have the legend. Those legend symbols have to be incorporated into the map when you submit the permit application. And this is just to highlight, and we really put this together for the benefit of the operators in South Central Kentucky, because like I said, they've never been exposed to reclamation plans. And we basically walked them through the entire phase of oil and gas well site development, through planning, construction, reclamation after well completion, maintenance of that well site during the productive life of the well, site closure, and finally bond release. A lot of you operators operate under a blanket bond. Well, in South Central Kentucky, the bulk of the operators have individual well bonds. They're used to having that bond returned to them after they plug the well. Under the new requirements, that bond's not going to be released until the well site's reclaimed after plugging and abandonment. And another requirement of Senate Bill 186 deals with well transfers. Any well that we receive a transfer after, obviously, June 24th, there's additional language on the transfer form that requires the purchasing or successor operator to assume reclamation requirements for that well. And as we talk about best management practices, and based on our inspection staff, we know that the bulk of you operators in the two geologic basins already use these, but these are some of the best management practices that are implemented through the three phases of issues associated with well site reclamation: erosion control, water runoff, and sediment control. And you can see a lot of these, or several of these best management practices are implemented at different stages to control either erosion or sedimentation from the disturbed area or water runoff. And the location of these particular BMPs need to be identified on the map when you submit the permit application with the reclamation plan. And these are just some typical diagrams showing BMPs for both the well access road in the upper left and well site diagrams with BMPs. You notice the implementation or usage of vegetated filter strip area or silt fences. These are commonly used throughout the two geologic basins, and these are probably the most common BMP used for both erosion and sediment control of the disturbed areas. We also have diversion ditches around the back of the well pad or well site, compacted soil, and there again, one of the things we're going to be looking at is making sure that these BMPs are situated between the well site and any waterways of the Commonwealth. And these next series of slides just show different types of BMPs that can be implemented. Like I say, most common one is a silt fence, and this is just an erosion and sediment control trapping mechanism. These are from actual well sites in eastern Kentucky, specifically Johnson County. We have a diagram in the lower right showing how a typical silt fence is constructed. And all the new changes related to Senate Bill 186 is going to be incorporated into the Oil and Gas Well Operators Manual on our website. And our hope right now is to have a updated version of that by the end of August. So you can use that as a reference manual. We'll have these diagrams in there for a point of reference for the well operator. And when we talk about silt fences, there's a right way and a wrong way to do them. Obviously, these are the wrong way. Upper left, silt fence is not even in contact with the ground. Lower right, the silt fence has been constructed in a right location between the well access road and the stream, but you can see sediment has taken over the silt fence. It's actually going into the stream. And these are some of the things that our oil and gas inspectors are going to look at when they start inspecting these disturbed areas for compliance with Senate Bill 186. Water bars, we don't see a lot of these now. Most of these are used in eastern Kentucky. We've got drastic changes in topography to control surface water runoff. But this is another type of BMP that's used sporadically throughout the eastern Kentucky. Composite filter sock on the top. There again, that's another type of BMP that's not routinely used. But we have seen it, and it serves basically, it's comparable to a filter fence. Scarification, we see that a lot in some of the larger well pads. This is just a trench created by the dozer to allow vegetation to be initiated. Rock check dams, these are seen throughout eastern Kentucky on well access roads. These are just to slow down the velocity of the surface runoff, to promote sedimentation, and it'll further prevent erosion down slope of the well access road. Here we have a combination straw bales and a silt fence downslope of a culvert. This is a well access road in Lawrence County. It doesn't look good, but these are acceptable BMPs. Here we have erosion control matting. These are just rolled up sheets of material that includes fertilizer, vegetation, that's typically put on extreme slopes. It's used routinely in the mining activity, but we also see it used in some of the larger well pads in eastern Kentucky. There again, that's just another photo of erosion control matting. Here we have culverts. Obviously, a culvert is to control surface water runoff, to direct it to natural drainage patterns. And what we've seen so far, not only with the implementation of Senate Bill 186, but also wells that are on severed mineral tracts, operators are really good about implementing these and constructing these in natural drainage ways. This is a 5-well pad in Floyd County that's implemented BMPs. This shows the location. We have 50-barrel polyurethane tanks from the earthen berm around them. There's a diversion ditch in the back of the location behind the meters. The access road does have, it's not shown in the photo, but they do have culverts strategically located to control surface water runoff. They've implemented water bars, and there's silt fences basically downslope of all disturbed areas. So this is ideally is what we'd like to see. You also have vegetation established. One of the things that's really unique to South Central Kentucky, and it sort of compounds the problem when we talk about requirements of Senate Bill 186, even though the operators are not that familiar with reclamation plans, one of the things unique to their area is that they're drilling in karst topography. And when they submit a reclamation plan, it needs to be designed with the idea of protecting these surface karst features, primarily sinkholes. And that's some of the issues we've seen already since the implementation of Senate Bill 186 down in south central part of the state. These are just some of the criteria that you use to identify these karst BMPs, how to identify them. Once they're identified, they're going to be obvious on the reclamation map that's attached to the ED10 form. Like I say, these have to be identified, and the BMP has to be located strategically between the disturbed area and the actual karst feature. So to highlight, or at least getting the operators in South Central Kentucky on a thinking or learning curve as to what's going to be required from us and what our inspector is going to want to see when they take that reclamation plan that's attached to the permit out to the field, they're going to want to know where the proposed well is and the proposed access road. And this has to be presented on a scale, a topographic scale map of 1 to 400 feet. And you can see the proposed well is highlighted in green, or the proposed access road is highlighted in green, with some of the surface karst features identified by closed contours with hatchers. So anytime a proposed access road or well site is constructed around these, the operator needs to identify where they're going to implement their BMPs to protect those karst features. But this is what we actually got from some of the operators. As opposed to a well-constructed topographic base map on 1 to 400, this is constructed on 8.5 by 14 paper, no scale, no topographic contours, but they did attempt to show drainage patterns. And this is some of the issues that we're trying to bring the operators in South Central Kentucky up to the learning curve of what they're going to need to maintain compliance with the requirements of Senate Bill 186. Right now, we've rejected, since the implementation of Senate Bill 186, we've rejected 16 permit applications because inadequacies in the reclamation plan. All 16 of them have been in South Central Kentucky. But because of the outreach meetings that we had, the operators, not only in the two in the geologic basins in Henderson and Jenny Wiley, but when we had the one in South Central Kentucky, they knew about the impending June 24th deadline for the implementation of Senate Bill 186. So we had a rapid rush to get these permit applications in. For example, in May of this year, we issued 42 permits. In June, when we had the implementation of Senate Bill 186, we issued 105. And the day before the implementation of Senate Bill 186, we had 32 well operators from South Central Kentucky hand deliver permit applications to our office just to meet the deadline. So this has been our biggest issue with the implementation of this bill, is to bring those operators up to the 21st century, to get them used to the requirements of these new regulations. Some of the other issues that we've seen are reclamation plans in floodplains. This is primarily in western Kentucky in the Ohio River floodplain. We have a lot of structures built above the surface to accommodate seasonal flooding. If you propose a well that is subjected to seasonal flooding, include that in your narrative on the ED10, that it is subjected to periodic flooding, because obviously when you do have flooding, the BMPs you've implemented are going to be gone. So rather than receive a citation or a notice of violation, the inspector will know, because he's got in hand, that you've identified that particular well is subject to periodic flooding. So these are things that, as an operator, you need to be aware of as you put together these reclamation plans. If there's something unique to that specific site, include it in your reclamation plan, or contact your oil and gas inspector and tell them, hey, we've got a unique situation here, and this is where we're going to address it should there be any erosion or sedimentation control issues. It's just a preventative measure that you need to be aware of as an operator to try to head off any issues as a result of these new requirements. This is a list of vegetative mixtures that are going to be available to the operators, and there again, this is going to be on our website. And these mixtures are already required on the wells permitted on severed mineral tracts. Now these are going to be required on every permit. And we've got a lot of flexibility as to the different types of vegetative mixtures that the operator can choose to put on his disturbed area.